Thank you for listening to Podcast One. Don't forget to download our brand new Podcast One app. That's what that guy sounds like. It's like half robot.
Right.
He's not auto-tuned, but you know who I'm talking about, that guy?
Well, yeah. It'd be better if it was auto-tuned. drinking a pink drink right now. Changing up a little bit.
Man, I missed the hell out of you last week. I couldn't stand to be away from you. So we are recording this in person together.
I know. You know what's funny about that? is I could tell. So first of all, for those that don't know, yes, I was in California last week. You guys heard the episode. Thank you all for the kind words.
Record-breaking numbers, by the way.
Was it?
I think so. It's the highest number that I've gotten. Maybe.
Thank you for the kind words. Definitely appreciate it. If you are only an Afterthoughts listener, what the hell's wrong with you, first of all? Second of all, I've talked about the trip a little bit on an after-party episode we did of Sight and Sound. That episode, I thought, for me personally, I thought I was awful on that episode.
On which episode?
The after-party episode that we did.
Why?
I don't know. Because I was like so loud, which is not typically how I am. I was like really loud and... I don't know, man. It was really strange.
I produced.
No, not loud like the volume. Like I was yelling at you and Carl. But anyways, that's beside the point. The point is, you came in and you were like really giddy.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh,
I was a big fan of that Afterthoughts, and I say that as somebody who had the least involvement of the whole thing. I listened to that thing like 8 times, mainly because I knew that there were Easter eggs in there, and I did want to break some of those down on the other side of the song. But I did want to admit something to you.
I'm doing that thing where I podcast on my back too. I apologize.
So you know how I left that show early? I'm gonna have to edit that out. Thanks. You know how I left recording that to go see Ant-Man and the Wasp, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I have some. Yeah.
So
I've got my own thoughts about that.
I went to go see Ant-Man with a mutual friend and somebody that he brought with him that I did not know. So we watched the entire movie.
Johnny Craig?
No, we're sitting there. The credits are rolling.
For those of you that know, you know.
The credits are rolling, and I turn to him and I say, you know what I think? For the most part, I think Marvel post-credit scenes are nothing. And so I did my whole take on Marvel post-credit scenes.
Haven't seen it.
One of Ant-Man's is actually really, really good, but I had this take before we saw it. And I was still, again, speaking ultimately to most Marvel movies. And so the person, again, the complete stranger, she's hearing me say all this.
A rando.
And she turns to me and goes... You know, if you don't want to wait for the post-credit scenes, you can always just look them up on YouTube. And you know what I did at this moment? I pulled the Collider card. Have you ever pulled the Collider card out on somebody?
Do you mean you turn to them and says, I know, I work for Collider?
Yes.
First of all, no, I haven't, because most people don't know what that is.
Yeah.
The only thing, you know what? I've learned that nothing makes most people run away, especially the ladies, quicker than being like, well, I podcast.
That's why I said, I didn't say podcast. I just said,
right.
I get it. I'm with Collider.
What's that?
Yeah, but if she goes home, she was a big movie buff, so I actually
really?
assume that she knows what I'm talking about. But when she goes home to look it up, though, Jay, she'll know, and she'll be impressed. You're listening to Collider Afterthoughts, the show that examines the content and the fandom at Collider. My name is Ryan Snelling. Jaye Williams, what up?
I'm here. I'm back. You know what I thought was strange? Shame on me. Because while I was in studio, I made that comment about the AC. And I have the same problem. Here, my office, my studio, it gets sweltering hot in the summertime.
I don't remember it being like this last year. This feels new to me.
Well, the dog turd couch that you're sitting on wasn't there before, and I told you before we started recording.
That's not true. It was definitely here last summer.
No, it wasn't. Not last summer, because I just bought those couches in the fall.
Right, your new furniture. Yeah.
Yeah, you used to sit on that shitty chair. Remember that?
That's true, yeah. And then you sat in it one day and realized all the pain and torment that you had put me through, and then we figured it out.
I recently plugged my Xbox up, and I sat in it to play Xbox one day because I can't sit too far from the TV when I play video games.
After all the grief I've gotten for getting into video games, you plugged up your Xbox?
I've told you this, but I've only played it like 3 or 4 times since I've plugged it up.
What have you played? FIFA, Grand Theft Auto. I downloaded Fortnite, but I haven't played it yet. What about Rocket League? You into Rocket League?
No. I feel
you like soccer.
I do like soccer, but that seems like some game you'd play at like Dave and Buster's or something like that.
Jay, it's very watchable. I've been streaming it, and guess who I'm going to be streaming with soon?
Who's that? Joey Russell?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Me and Joey, we connected the other day, and we exchanged PSNs. I'm an Xbox guy, so I don't know.
We should be more involved with Collider than we are. And now we are. Mark Fernandez, yell at me when you buy a music website. Here you go.
Yell at you? Why would he yell at you? Holler?
Yeah,
holler at me.
Give me a shout.
Holler at me. He's in New Hampshire doing nothing.
Whatever. Well, I don't think he's doing nothing. He's probably working on some sort of...
That's a commentary on New Hampshire, not Mark Fernandez.
It could be, because we have no idea. Not that we need to know.
New Hampshire's the forgotten state.
Is it?
I think that's what you call
it. Isn't that where Vince McMahon lives? No, that's Connecticut. Excuse me. My apologies.
Kentucky, the bluegrass state. New Hampshire, the forgotten state.
Okay.
California,
the nothing state.
Paradise. Okay, here's what I want to do. I want to talk about last week's experience, mainly from your perspective, because you were there. You and we've kind of talked way too much ad nauseum about this, because
not just you and I, a lot of people. So like I said at the top of the show, I've talked about my trip a little bit on Sight and Sound, and that's the only place I've done it in podcast form. And I get it, we need to talk about it here, but a lot of people are, how's your trip?
Right.
And you know me, I don't really like communicating with other people.
Well, it's not so much the trip aspect. It's the Collider aspect and the Afterthoughts episode. And so Christian last week, God love him, in the Schmoville Facebook group, he posted about our show, and he said it's been the best example of the live show since the live show, or something to that extent. So Jay and we're here to announce we're picking up the Schmoes No show. No. But anyway.
There's been a lot of talk about that.
So.
Legitimately.
Look. I'm very humbled by that. That meant a lot to me. I'm proud of the episode mainly because I wasn't even involved in the episode, really. I was, all the way across the country from everything else that was going on. I'm proud of the episode because it's a great episode, and I have listened to it multiple times. But and I am very proud of it. And I was humbled by that statement, and I'm glad that Christian feels the same way that I do. So here's what I'm fascinated by. The comments of that post drove me nuts. So again, thankful, humbled as the host of this show, but as a fan of Schmoes No, and as a Schmovillian, before I hosted all of this, I see comments asking what Afterthoughts is, where Afterthoughts could be found, and as a Schmovillian, I'm thinking, what the hell is wrong with you people?
There's 2 problems with that. Problem number 1, we've been in the group. It's been promoted. And second of all, before you even commented, if you still didn't know what it was, you could have looked.
Yeah. Because he says our names.
Do better.
Like, how does Schmo
Hey, guys. Do better. We're on the internet, all right? All you got to do is look it up.
It's not even about that. It's the countless amounts of times that Christian and Ellis plugged After Schmo. And you have to be able to connect the dots, because there was a whole announcement. Afterthought still goes up in the same time slot. It's only been 3 months.
Right.
So Ryan and Jaye we're no strangers. It's been a thing, and it's not hard to access if you are a fan of everything that's going on. It blows my mind. Again, it's funny.
It's also on SK+.
I think it's hilarious that people don't know who I am. I still laugh at that. It doesn't bother me at all. But it gets to a point where I don't understand those comments.
Yeah.
Like the people that have to find out, I've been a thing. You've been a thing. Our show, the whole concept, it's been a thing. I don't know why we still have this problem. Like, it's not even about, I'm not even saying that they should all be diehard fans, that they should listen to every single episode. I don't need them to be a listener. I'm just shocked that they don't know is my entire point.
At least be aware.
Yeah.
So,
as a Schmovillian, I'm aware. Before I hosted the show, I'm aware because I'm in the group and I subscribe to some YouTube channels.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily perturbed about it, which is fine. I think it's funny. I do think it's funny that it's still a thing, but yeah, I mean, just so the thing that I'm proud of about that episode, one, I'm proud that it's good, that it went off without a hitch, but I'm also proud that it showcased what our brand is, both here on Afterthoughts, but just in general, our quote unquote brand, our chemistry, what we bring to the podcast world is also echoed over in Sight and Sound. And it's, to me at least, it's the best example of Sight and Sound that we could have ever showcased on Afterthoughts, because every week we have this, quote unquote structure of talking about Collider and the space, and that's all well and good, but it just proves that we're good at having conversations, and that's what it was. I went into that. It's fine if other people prepare a podcast their own way. I didn't prepare one bit. None. No preparation. Right. I went into it completely cold, just wanted to sit down and talk to these guys. Yeah, and I thought it went off really, really well. Big thanks to everybody out there for being so accommodating.
And there were a ton of people that were nice. A lot of people gave us, they praised us, and I'm always thankful for that. We did have some great fans and listeners, people that enjoyed the episode, and I'm glad. Our buddy Klaus, he wrote an essay as to how you and I are Christian Ellis replacements
from Germany.
But so there were a lot of jokes thrown out. Rasika
replacements for schmoes.
Yeah. And Rasika was on board with this, so we were flattered by that as well. But ultimately,
I can never run the schmodo.
Ultimately, what we arrived to is that Jay and I are doing our own thing on Sight and Sound. So it's like, you can just listen to what we're doing anyway and not consider us for schmoes no. So that's, again, to bridge back to that episode of Sight and Sound After Party. So when Jay got back from California, we had a conversation about California on Sight and Sound, and that's what Jay and I do consistently. So if you're calling for Jay and I to replace the schmoes, why don't you just come over and hang with us instead?
Right.
Instead of, looking for us to come over there, why don't you come to us? We'd be glad to have you.
We're talking about things that we're talking about movies sometimes. We talk about TV. Sometimes we talk about things you probably don't even care about. But that's the point of falling in love with a podcast. It's sometimes we talk about nothing at all.
Wouldn't it be great if Collider covered music, Jay?
No. We've been here. Maybe. But only if I'm involved. Anyways.
No, you were supposed to say, why don't you listen to Sight and Sound?
Oh, yeah.
That's the whole point.
That too. Yeah. Or they could just buy us.
I do want to talk about some of the interesting tidbits. Like, so tell these guys.
I don't like California.
I know you don't. Okay. I don't want to talk about California. I want to talk about Collider and Afterthoughts and your experience. So you walk into the studio. What's going on?
Well, there's this whole thing where people have this misconception is a word, but this idea of different places in the country and how different people act. Like Northerners are very harsh, like Northeasterners, people from New York, Boston, etc. They're very harsh. Fuck you, hey, get the fuck out of here. That sort of thing. Where the Southern hospitality. You've got, and then you've got a lot of the West Coast stuff. It's very liberally minded.
Well, I think that's something we've come across interacting with these people. Like over the past couple of years, I've I picked up on differences in how we talk, and we don't quite get each other always.
Sort of, but the thing about California is it's it's a place of transplants, right? There's people obviously that have lived there.
Sure.
There's people that work at Collider that have lived
Ellis
there.
is from Virginia. That's our next door neighbor.
Yeah,
Kentucky.
Christian from New York also was in Florida, and listen, when people come over to my house, or if people were to come into my work or something, I usually greet them, give them a tour around, show them where the bathroom is, show them where they can get water. I walked in, Wendy Lee, love her to death.
Yeah.
Amazing. She greeted me. I don't think she knew what Afterthoughts was either, to be fair.
Oh, really?
Maybe. She said, I think your name was on the schedule. Shook my hand, walked back to her desk, and myself and my girlfriend just stood in the middle of this.
She left you standing there?
Yes. No, this isn't against her. None of what I'm about to say is negative. It's just, I think it's just.
I love this.
Just, it is what it is. It's how we live our lives. And I was standing there.
That's one way to put it.
I was standing there in the middle of this warehouse.
Yeah.
And people knew I was there. I'm 6'3" or 4".
Right.
And I'm just like standing there. And my
Kayla's
girlfriend's got tattoos.
I was going to say, Kayla's got enough tattoos for every single employee.
Septum ring, all this stuff. So I'm just standing there, and I'm kind of like, I walk up and introduce myself to John Roca, and he sits across from Jeff Snyder. Jeff Snyder looks at me. I'm hoping that he'd be like, "Oh, hi, I'm." We just walk past each other. Don't even greet each other.
What was that about?
I have no idea. Okay. I don't know.
Okay.
Jeff was great. Loved him on the podcast. Made my way over to the other side of the room where all the editors are. I saw Remsen. No need to talk to him.
Why do we follow him on Instagram? Do you remember when
I don't follow him on Instagram.
Oh, you said you peeked at his Instagram a couple weeks ago. I followed him, and then I was on an unfollow spree the other night, and I saw Remsen, and so I thought to myself,
well, he doesn't follow me.
Does this matter? And I was like, Remsen might as well not exist, so I unfollowed him.
Yeah, I saw him, and I thought...
In my life,
I said, there's Remsen. I'm good.
What if Remsen was the person that showed you around? What if he was the tour guide? What if you left California with just the biggest impression from Remsen here?
I probably would have, showed him around. But
what?
I went to Cobster. Cobster was great. I think he had headphones in. Didn't really realize I was there. He has like a desk that sort of blocks his view. Cody did the thing that I typically do. There are times I sit in an office at my day job where I usually have the door like cracked, basically closed. But I know when people are there, and I know when people are probably going to come talk to me. And when people come into my office, I act surprised, like I didn't know they were there. And I think that's what he did. Like he had this unnatural reaction of, I said, oh, hey, what's up, man? He was like, oh, hey. Just like really quick, like I was there. Found my way to Frank's office. Frank couldn't have been more sweet.
Of course.
Just the best.
I know.
Just a nervous wreck, which is fine.
Nervous to meet you?
Just in general. I think nervous with life.
That's what I want to ask.
Second day, he gave me a box of LaCroix, which is fantastic.
Do you think everybody just weird, or were they nervous, or were they are they antisocial? This is just a weird vibe.
Yeah, to me, I think and this is just my read on the situation, I think for the most part, everybody there, with the exception of Roca and Mark, who came in later.
Riley or Ellis?
Actually, Mark, Riley, Roca, and Ellis. I think everybody else, for the most part, is just kind of a little bit introverted. Like they're just naturally introverted. And that's fine. That's totally cool. I mean, maybe that's not the case, and sometimes just because you're an introvert doesn't mean that you're always quiet either. Some people might see these people on camera and say, there's no way they're an introvert, but that's not necessarily true. By nature, my personality type, I'm an extrovert, but in social situations, I usually don't talk to people.
Right.
But I'm still categorized as an extrovert. Yeah, I mean, when I finally saw Riley talk to him, he was very, very accommodating. They're all accommodating, but he was, had a little bit more of that hospitality about him. But yeah, there was a while when I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be doing.
Fascinating.
I still don't know where the bathroom is.
Fascinating.
I still don't know where the bathroom is. Took another friend with me the next day to go to the Schmodown, and he said, "Hey, where can I get water?" I have no idea. He said, "Weren't you here yesterday?" Yeah.
Well, that's interesting though, because the space is big enough to where the space is big enough to where you kind of have to have a tour. You can't figure it out just by looking around. Like, were there places that you didn't see on camera?
Yeah. So I don't know where they film Harloff and Ellis. Dennis, I had forgot that Dennis even worked there until I saw him. But he has an office. There's like a lobby area, but it's just like it's a big open room. So
that's where Tommy Wiseau was playing football with those guys, probably.
No, I think that's just the office.
Oh,
the office is very wide open. The lobby area, it's like when you walk in the door. And it's to the left, but there's just a wall dividing it, almost saying like, "Hey, this is the lobby."
Yeah.
But there's like an area, I think, where the bathrooms are, down a hallway, but I don't know what's back there. I think they keep Schmodown stuff back there. There's another room next to the main studio that I think they do a lot of their green screen stuff in.
Right.
That I didn't go into. I think that's about it.
What were some interesting takeaways from the actual episode? So, the one thing that I keep going back to,
no one knows that Kayla was in the studio with me the entire time, sitting right between me and Mark.
Not Jay.
And she said that Molly's breath smelled like fish.
You're not supposed to talk about that.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's okay.
And that's not even what I want anyway.
She met
not
Molly
Kayla.
Later.
Talk to me about the actual episode. Like, the one thing that I took away.
On it. I was on the episode.
Oh my god! Can we just talk?
What do you want to talk about?
When I'm listening to that episode, I think one of the biggest things that I take away, it's actually very, very subtle. It's towards the beginning, like you were joking around and you asked them, "So what do you hate about Collider?" or we talk shit, blah 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 blah, talking about us, and or who has a problem with us, and then Cobster throws in, "Should we go get Dennis and Thad?"
Right.
Do you remember that point?
I do. I don't think Thad was there.
The joke being that they would be
the
ones that would have a problem with anything that we had done up until this point. So I thought that quick little dig was clever and fun. I loved how I loved Roka's whole thing. Oh my god. His intro was so amazing. I had to keep it in.
Definitely the most social. Just a ball of energy.
Yeah.
Which is crazy because he's so old.
And this is how I felt when we were recording, and then when I listened back to it too. Jeff Snyder came into that conversation. You could tell that right before that, he had listened to last week's show where we were complaining about news. So he comes in that studio with you hot out the gate. He's like super aggressive. And then once he realizes that we're just kind of all here talking, that he mellows out over time. But it's funny how he was so aggressive at the start.
Right. Which is funny because while I was wrangling people, again, I'm in the studio trying to figure out what's going to happen. I hadn't arranged any. We had sort of arranged some stuff with Frank, and Frank was kind of our fixer. And I pretty much wrangled everybody by telling them, "Listen, it's going to be super laid back. Just come in if you want." I wanted that. Like, so if anybody was listening, was like, "Man, it was kind of." Didn't we get a comment like that? I can't believe people were just coming in and out. Like, that's what we wanted. I told people, if you want to leave, go get somebody else, whatever, tag in, tag out. And while I was sort of my bait to get people into the room was, you guys can talk shit about us, you can talk shit about Collider, you can talk shit about the fans. It doesn't matter. Say whatever you want. I even told them the thing that we were prompted with. According to your boss, CEO, Mark Fernandez, we can talk about whatever we want on this show as long as we're not racist or sexist. And I think that got people into it. But while I was wrangling people, I looked out the door. I almost said my window as if it was my podcast studio. Looked out the door, and I saw Jeff Snyder on his computer, and I saw the YouTube video up with with our logo. And I'm like, oh, okay, so this is what's happening.
Well, the unfortunate, at least with me, and what I wanted more out of that conversation with Jeff was, you and I approached that whole Collider News thing 2 weeks ago. It came down to like an either-or argument, like where our whole perspective is we're not thrilled about Collider News taking time and space away from the other things that could exist. And because he brought up like the Russell Crowe, Roger Ailes story, and my whole point with that is like it's just not going to get the same numbers as another episode of something else that we're familiar with or anything like that. So the argument isn't that's not a great news story. I did appreciate his perspective because I loved his point where he said he's never been about clicks and views.
Absolutely.
And that's something that
completely
we need to remember.
Agree. And I told him that like that. I think it's interesting because, and this is I think a commentary in general of any sort of content that people create. We talked a lot about how big of fans we are of Jeff Snyder and his voice. And we were critical as well. It was almost as if we didn't say those things and we just had the criticism. But I think you're right. I think coming into the discussion, he was probably a little bit more ready to debate, and that's totally cool. He told me that before he actually came in. He was like, "Oh, we can totally debate what blah blah blah." Journalism. I was like, okay, that's fine. And I think when he came in and just realized like this is a conversation, you and I have a rapport of you can if you hate my favorite thing, it's fine because it's just not a big deal. And I think he settled into the fact that it was just a discussion.
Right.
Interesting how I think some of the episode turned into a Creative Control, which is a podcast that I used to do. And it sort of was like that with Beardo when we had him on, sort of just talking about like the challenges of making this content and what we should do, what we shouldn't do, the insecurities, I think. And the biggest thing I took away from the whole conversation is that Collider has a comments problem. I'm not talking about people commenting on the things because that's going to happen. They all have a huge problem with reading comments. It's a source of a lot of, I think, problems that they might have. Maybe some morale there. Mark Ellis hits it on the head. He just is like, he gets it.
Yes.
I think the rest of the crew, though, I think they need to get together and have like some sort of summit company outing and just go over comment like therapy and comment psychology because I think it's running rampant on the whole studio.
So my impression of the studio, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, like, and I'm a little bit more wide-eyed, right? Like to me, these are people on my TV, whereas they're just kind of people now, right?
Yeah.
So I think of it like they're just like throwing paper airplanes, are all cutting up, and it's a great big fun house. And they just get to make YouTube videos all day. Is that the vibe? Is it something else entirely? Is it a balance of both?
Collider Studios essentially is a morgue when I walked in there, which there could be many things with that. So keep in mind, I came in on the 5th, the day after the 4th, the day after a holiday.
Right.
It was also a skeleton crew, so
a lot of people were on vacation.
Yeah, people weren't there.
Thad, Perry, Christian, Fernandez.
Right, and everybody was just kind of doing work, but there was no music on. Nobody was filming anything. Nobody was recording anything, but there was no music on. They weren't really talking to each other. If they were, it was like a dull murmur like this.
It was on Slack. Is that app?
Yeah, whatever that is.
They have a Slack.
So it was just very strange. When I came in the next day, for the Schmodown, it was a little bit more lively because there was more people there. There were people that I had never seen before that apparently work there. There were people having like a business meeting there and like that were dressed up nice. Like
during the Schmodown?
When I came in for the Schmodown, like, are those accountants? Are they who are you?
They were shareholders.
Who the fuck works at Collider?
And there was no explanation?
I mean, no one was going to introduce me to him. That's for sure.
You got to go out to dinner with them though after the Schmodown, right? Like Kalinowski and all those guys. That was cool.
Yeah. It was Mark Ellis. So okay, quick story time. So not quick. This is going on for a while. So
we'll end it after this.
Because I hate awkward situations.
Right.
As soon as the Schmodown was over, I took off. I left. And I was going to go walk down Melrose or something, and it was hot as balls. It was 117 degrees. So I left, and I got a text from Ellis, hey, did you guys leave? We're thinking about going to Wood Ranch. So I said, okay. So I came back, and it was Ellis, Jay Washington, Ken, Kalinowski showed up, myself, my friend, and Kayla. And who else was there? What's her name that does the Schmodown?
Jen Sturger.
Jen Sturger was there. And I think a couple other people. I think some fans that had come. There's a guy named Alex that I met who listens to the show, who helps do some production stuff for the Schmodown. That guy, shout out to Alex. That was cool meeting him. Yeah, just sat there and hung out and talked.
I have a
Ellis, amazing. Ellis met my best friend that lives out in California, and my friend walked away from that whole situation and scenario saying, man, there are not people like Ellis out here.
Yeah.
Like, he is the most genuine, most cool, most amazing person. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you said that, Jay, because I have a bone to pick with Ellis now. So
No.
I didn't tell you this, but when I'm editing that show, I left earlier than everybody else. Like, I just got up from my computer, went to the Ant-Man, right? And you guys recorded for like 5 extra seconds. So I'm editing the show together, and my audio is gone. The rest of the audio, I hear you guys getting up from the table, and I hear Mark Ellis say to you, nice to meet you, man. I heard it in the audio.
Yeah.
Mark Ellis
That happened.
did not meet you for the first time there.
To be fair.
There's no fairness.
Well, to be fair, the first time I met him, I didn't even know he liked Van Halen. So
what does that matter?
That's what I'm saying. I was not involved at all, but yeah, he probably should have known. It's okay.
That was the second time you all interacted.
Yeah.
John Roca didn't even know that he was on Sight and Sound, which is baffling to me.
Has he been on multiple times on Sight and Sound?
He was on one episode of After Schmo that you might be confusing. I think he's been on Sight and Sound once.
Right.
But
Ken, I did say to Ken, I said, Ryan sends us best. And he says, well, I rescind it. which is hilarious. Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's a lot of that going on with it drives me nuts. They're a little frustrating in that way.
In what way?
They just don't remember things that they're like the Schmoville Facebook group. They have no idea what we are.
Right.
They have no idea.
Christian, though, he never forgets.
I feel like an idiot. I have to correct myself on something that I've been railing against over the past few weeks. The podcast descriptions, I came to a haunting realization.
This is either going to be not that big of a deal to some people or absolutely hilarious.
Both.
Right.
So every time that I've railed against the podcast descriptions, I am looking. So Sight and Sound is hosted by Podbean, which is a podcast hosting site. And on our Podbean page, we follow all of the Collider podcasts. So when I'm on my Podbean homepage, I see every single podcast. And because of the volume that they put, I mean, it's one after another, Collider podcast. Right. And so I see every description front and center. And so every single description that I see from podcast to podcast to podcast is wildly different, which is still a problem because they should all have the same basis for links and blah, blah, blah. But the Movie Talk podcast descriptions always appeared as one solid block with no spaces, no hyperlinks, and I'd get enraged by it and talk about it on here.
Enraged or enraged?
Enraged. ENRAGED. So I go to my podcast app to follow up with this earlier in the week. The hyperlinks work, and it's not all just block text. However, they still need a consistent podcast description because I think like the factory has like one sentence for a description, and then movie talk will be an essay, and that's still annoying, but the hyperlink still kind of works sometimes. So I just wanted to make sure that, because I think that Dennis and Thad, people like that, probably have heard me railed against that over the past few weeks, and they probably think I'm out of my mind. So depending on what you're looking at, it can be wildly different. So anyway, let's play some catch up here. They put out a mailbag last weekend, and it was purely a behind the scenes mailbag. So a lot of people just asked Collider questions.
Right.
And I asked you to listen to it because I wanted to hear some of your takeaways.
I watched it because it's a great looking show.
It is.
It looks different. It had mailbag, funny enough, sort of checks a lot of boxes that we talk about on the show. Like, it has a fan interaction. It looks very different. It has a rotating panel. So, one person is rotating from time to time. Yeah, I listened to it. My biggest takeaway, the one that I was sort of on the edge of my seat for, was watching like a hawk, ready to just dissect, was the one about, is podcasting hard, and why can't we get more podcasts? How hard could it be? And to be honest, I was anticipating potential excuses, I think, a little bit, but that's not what we got. Perry was very honest and forthcoming about how, because now that they have a podcast studio, which is very nice, I can attest to that, how efficient podcasting is, how much more efficient it is than shooting video, and how quickly they can just pop in and do it. I loved hearing that, and it makes me excited. It sounds like there are people there maybe that are interested in doing the podcast stuff because it's right there for them at work. The thing that I was a little bit apprehensive about hearing was the whole aspect about, well, even though podcasting is easier and we can do more podcasts now, it still requires someone to edit it and upload it and title it and write the description and all this stuff. And I sort of pumped the brakes at that because I think you should just learn how to do it, because Ryan and I have put out so many podcasts, so many YouTube videos, and we do not have an overwhelming sense of skill level about most things. Yeah, I do my own graphic design and I make the music and this and that. I'm not asking you to do that, but editing a podcast and uploading it and writing a description, anybody can do it. Anybody can, and it's not an excuse. And if you and I can do as much content as we can, the people at Collider can definitely do that. So that is not an excuse.
I was going to say, the only thing we're missing is the set, essentially.
Finding time to podcast, I get that. I definitely get that. An hour is real time. 30 minutes is real time. I'm not saying that they just need to be pumping out like hundreds of podcasts a day, but
I mean, for example, I did my own solo podcast today for Sight and Sound. Right. It took me 45 minutes to record and literally 1 minute to edit it and export it, and it was up within seconds.
So we're recording this on Thursday. Between Thursday and Friday, between the two of us, we will have done 4 podcasts. We will have done and edited and uploaded 4 podcasts. The editing and uploading is the quickest part.
Yes. It's just, yeah. Especially when, so I know from experience with you guys, all of the tracks were together when I was editing that. So the only thing you need to pay attention to is that everyone is on a consistent level. And that's just a matter of raising and lowering the decibels.
Right.
And there's an ideal decibel, which is negative 0.6 decibels is the focus range, and throw in a theme song. And it does not take that long to do that at all. And if it does, then you're just not doing it right. And Jay and I are not talking about just buy this piece of equipment. No, you probably already got it. And
also just learning how to do that would also just be beneficial to you outside of Collider. For anybody there, I mean, I'm assuming I'm assuming Riley knows how to do it because he's doing podcasting stuff at his own house. But, if you learn how to do those things, nothing's stopping you from going and making your own podcast outside of Collider.
Yeah, and descriptions just take... Again, why don't you just...
Descriptions is just typing.
I was going to say, Jay and I have a Google Doc where there is a
template.
It's a template for our description. So all we have to do is write 3 sentences specifically for that episode, and then everything else is there.
I don't even go to the template anymore. I just go to...
the previous episode?
Yeah, and just copy it.
Right. I mean, you might have to adjust, again, going back to the podcast descriptions, you might adjust... like the spaces for the hyperlinks and things like that so that everything's aligned properly. But if you look at every single thing Sight and Sound does, there's not a misstep.
And obviously some shows, maybe you have different things that you're wanting to plug and this and that. But bottom line, it's typing. It's just typing. That's all it is.
That was only the real thing that I wanted to talk about was that episode, because that sort of, like you said, caught my eye there, or my ears rather, when I heard them talking about that. And there were a few other things that I thought were interesting, and I think that's just a great episode to listen to if you're a fan of Collider in general. So go back and listen to, I believe it was Sundays. Saturday was the legit mailbag, and you can go back and listen to last Sunday's behind-the-scenes mailbag. Let's talk about this out-of-nowhere acquisition of the Wrestling Sheet. So, I don't even remember. I think this was linked to me because I didn't catch the tweet that was made, I believe, on the Collider video tweet. And
I think I missed it too.
I was going to say, I definitely missed it because...
I think this was linked in a separate group text or group chat.
Yeah, I think it was linked to us. And when I went to Collider Video's account, it was like kind of back in the history that day. So I was like, man, this just flew right past me. So if you guys don't know, Collider purchased this blog called The Wrestling Sheet, which is sort of like a homegrown, fan-made site. What's the gentleman's name? Ryan Satin?
Yeah, sure.
I think that's his name, Ryan Satin. And... Ryan Satin, and so this site was homegrown. He started it in like 2015. He previously worked for TMZ, I think, and so he's just been blogging about wrestling. And I think he has his own show, his own podcast for it as well. I don't know if there's a YouTube channel or not, but
I think he did produce video content as well.
So the video presented to us in that tweet was like a brief announcement, and the video is Ryan sitting there at the Collider desk. He's got the logo behind him, and he's talking about having just been acquired by Collider. And as he dives into this, he basically Collider's in the wrestling game, wrestling coverage game, and then
as they have been with Body Slam and this and that,
right? But on a much
of course
greater scale, of course. But and I think he also does some UFC stuff as well. So this reminded me a little bit of how Complex was sorted out by a few sites, Collider being one of them, and then there was there were a couple other sites.
Complex acts as an MCN, like a multi-channel network. So
yeah,
and Collider is still under Complex, as Complex is still their MCN. Anthony Fantano, the Needle Drop, also MCN under Complex.
And then there's that one that's like
Pigeons and Planes. So really, Complex is a quote-unquote media conglomerate in that sense. They're a house that houses multiple brands, Pigeons and Planes being one, Collider being one, First We Feast being another. And it seems like, makes a lot of sense, this makes sense that Collider would also do that. We saw this by them spinning off Collider Games. The thing that I find interesting, and that I guess sort of caught me off guard personally, so just to get this out in the open, this acquisition doesn't necessarily resonate with me personally because I'm not a wrestling fan, which is totally fine. I'm looking at this in a bigger picture sort of sense for Collider. I didn't really realize that they were in the game of making acquisitions of other companies.
Right.
Like, it makes a lot of sense. I don't know how many people are employed with this group. I think it's definitely multiple people. I think there's 2 or 3 for sure.
Well, it's definitely, I think it's probably just 2 or 3 because I think it's just him, and the only other names that were mentioned were people that help him with the podcast.
Right.
So I don't know if they're writers. I don't know if he writes all of it, but it's a minimal crew for sure.
Do we know where they're based out of? Are they based out of Los Angeles? Or is
I
he
think
based out of
he
Los
has
Angeles?
to be.
Okay.
I mean, he works for TMZ. I assume that he's there.
Right. So, yeah, I just didn't realize they were in the acquisition game. It does make a lot of sense because if there are multiple people that work there, they're growing their employee base, and that's more people to potentially help them out with other things. We see Haley Fouch from the .com obviously coming over and doing stuff, and I think that's good. There's a lot of things that go into this, though. And first of all, and we're not privy to any information about the acquisition, but there's the dollar amount that it costs to get this. There is salaries involved with whoever is a full-time employee. And however they choose to divvy that money up is also interesting. I like it. I like the acquisition. The acquisition of a wrestling, based site is interesting. They've dabbled in it, like you said. I think there's some overlap with nerd culture and geek culture and wrestling, so it does make sense.
And the Schmodown, of course, too.
Of course. I think the biggest question for me, and the biggest, I think, question mark is now the best time to do that? Also, let's also throw out another thing, too. We now know, and we'll talk more about this later, that one of Collider's quote-unquote currency, or the economy of Collider, is based on news stories. We see so many news stories from movies and pop culture, entertainment, whatever. Now they're doing news in this wrestling thing. If they're breaking news stories, it gets aggregated to other sites. They're getting more views, making more money, etc. I don't know. I don't know if, and this isn't critical, I don't know if now is the right time to do that. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
Are you saying that because we don't know where they come from from a financial standpoint? Like, again, going back to the point you made, you didn't even know they were in the business of acquiring brands?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an aspect of it. I don't know. Right now, because I'm so far on the outside of this stuff, it's like I don't know what the plan is. Like,
right. But that's the stuff we're never going to get, probably.
Of course.
Right? Are we ever going to find that stuff out? Because based on we've had conversations like this before, and we just don't get much of a reaction from it.
There's an angle of things making sense, like to acquire a business, and then there's things that make sense in line with one another. It makes sense for Collider Video to launch a podcast feed. It makes sense for Collider Video to venture into gaming. And it makes sense for Collider to venture into wrestling, but to go and buy another company when we've heard things like they're tight, things are a little bit, they're spread very thin. It's just interesting. It's an interesting time to be in the acquiring other businesses. I will say this one thing too that I wanted to point out, and I'm sorry, I think I was about to cut you off, but I love the idea of Collider. So Complex acquiring Collider back in the day is sort of similar to this, but like it would be crazy if Complex acquired IGN, right? That's huge. Yeah. I love the idea of somewhat indie spaces acquiring smaller indie spaces. Like I'm not saying this is going to happen, but like if somebody approached Sight and Sound because they wanted, if a sports website talk to Sight and Sound because they said we want pop culture stuff, like that would make a lot of sense. It's a ringer type of move. It's a what's it called? What was his other thing that he had? Bill Simmons had Grantland sort of move.
I think you guys know that I'm pretty much always coming from the perspective of a Collider Video fan first, and even to a fault, right? Sometimes I can be misguided in some of my in the direction that I go in sometimes. And I think again, it makes sense, it's logical. Like, wrestling is obviously a big market in the way that gaming is a big market, so I would be a hypocrite to say that that's not a good move, but Collider Games is. I recognize it. It's one of the details is that Christian Harloff will be helping and working with this gentleman directly. And that sort of bumps up against what I wanted to bring to the table today, which was Collider Live. But we don't have to talk about Collider Live in general just yet. It just feels like that everything is being spread so thin that the focus is no longer on Collider Video, to the point where I don't know if they're fully taking care of that audience. And we will get to a Collider Live discussion eventually, but I think overall that's just what it feels like. And this is the stuff I don't agree with. There were comments, literal comments, where people would just be like, we don't get TV talk, but you go and do this.
Right.
It's like those things are
just... That's another conversation.
It's just not even related.
It's not a factor.
I was going to say, like, you can still get TV talk with this thing. It's not a cause and effect type shit. And that's the stuff I don't respond to. But if you wanted to just overall talk about, like, it just feels like everybody is going everywhere else but Collider Video, and Collider Video, it just, the Collider News stuff doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And that's another discussion. And again, I'm kind of going everywhere here, but we had talked about this last week too, or the week before last, we asked each other, how does Collider make money? And we sort of arrived at the fact that we don't know if it's from YouTube views necessarily, because they're actively working on a video series, Collider News, that gets them minimal plays, but the Schmodown gets the most plays, and it requires a Patreon. Like, based on that logic, it's like, okay, it's not as easy as they make money from YouTube videos.
But it's technically it's content that Collider doesn't own.
Right.
So that's one aspect, but I get what you're saying.
Well, I mean, the discussion would then be, then they should own it. If they made money from YouTube videos, then it would be stupid not to own it when it destroys everything else that they're doing, is the point I'm arriving at.
No, I
know that they don't own it.
Right, I totally get that. So I think there's so many different places to go here.
Oh, yes.
I think and we talked about this off air, but I agree with the sentiment about Collider sort of feeling a little bit left behind, or maybe set to the side. Collider Video. It's almost as if, in their eyes, I'm trying to play devil's advocate and sort of see both sides here. In their eyes, Collider Video is the most established thing, which it is, and the wheels are turning.
Well, I would argue, I think, and a lot of people would argue, Collider.com is still the most established thing.
But okay, both of those things. The movie coverage space is sort of it's working. It's working like clockwork, and I get all of that. But I feel like, for one, the company is a little bit volatile right now. It's a little bit fragile in terms of where they came from. No longer having the complex safety net, and they're still trying a lot of things. Like, a lot of what Collider is now, whatever this version is still in its infancy, right? So we've tried some things that haven't worked, that have already gotten canceled. And the new things that we do have, the podcast feed, Scott Mance's show. What else am I forgetting that's like brand new?
Games. Collider Games.
We have to take that out of the equation because that's another segment.
Okay, I'm sorry. They canceled the shows. Scott Mance. The Collider cover series. Remember that thing with Alex Wolff?
My point being is that this new frontier doesn't really feel that new, right? So the growth with Collider Video, the home base, it just doesn't seem like it seems like we're putting too many eggs in too many different baskets. And this goes back to a thing which Roca kind of joked about, is this debate about giving things enough time, right? He made that joke that Fernandez would debate us with that. I'm down to have the debate, because and I'm not saying I'm all on board for Caption This, or I'm all on board for all these other shows, but they definitely didn't have enough time to even live. Like, I'm not even a big fan. They just didn't have enough time. I could be wrong, but it just feels like it's just not the right time to do stuff like this right now.
It's weird. It's a weird, again, because I'm coming from this prism of Collider Video is the prime directive, right? So it's like, it just gets harder to navigate in general with this podcast because now we're covering things that we're not as familiar with, like games, like wrestling. It's like, it's just sort of hard to navigate these waters. So it's like just safe. It's my comfort zone to go back to how does this affect Collider Video?
Well,
so that's the easiest.
And games hasn't even really taken off yet, right? So it's like there's that, and there's one other angle to this too. I know we've talked about this Collider Live thing. It's obviously what a pretty big group of people either A, want or are interested in. And when not only does it seem like to me they're not interested in it, but they're also, it seems like they're just sweeping it under the rug and not wanting to address it. When you try to go off in another direction with something new, it's just like, guys, we're here. We're asking you, we're telling you we want this. We're telling you we will support this. And and again, I am the first person to say you don't always have to listen to the fans. But again, man, do we need it?
That statement is more so about like creative choices, like more specific creative choices, I think. But it's like, you're right. It makes, and I don't know a whole lot about business. I watched Shark Tank, and I spent 6 months with Gary Vaynerchuk. Right. But ultimately,
like as if you lived with him. He cooked me breakfast for a month.
To me, admittingly, don't know a whole lot. To me, it does not make any business sense to ignore Collider Live when you have people screaming and yelling
that they want it.
And just, they're like crying for help in a way. And it's really disheartening.
For 2 hours a week.
And there's just, I hate the idea. Okay, we'll get to Collider Live. But the other issue that I have...
I don't want people to be confused either. And I think we're both on the same page. We think the acquisition of this wrestling thing by a company like Collider does make sense.
Yes.
We both agree on that.
Yes.
The question is now the time.
Well, my worry is this going to take precedent over other things?
Yes.
And that's just how I'm reading the room right now. That's what it feels like to me right now when my Collider Video Live is like primarily Collider News, and then they make moves like this. That's just how I'm reading the room right now. So the other thing too that is kind of frustrating is because I just still don't think that they've mastered, again, going back to what you've said, they haven't mastered the newness of Collider games.
The new era.
The podcast network.
Yes.
The podcast network still feels amateurish.
I think, yes, I somewhat agree with that. It's not just that it feels amateurish, quote unquote. I think it still feels a little too familiar, like what we've already had. It just feels like things are on their own feeds now. But we have the .com podcast, which we'd always had, Riley Roundtable, our show, which always existed. There's not a whole lot of newness there either.
So when you and I we had this conversation on After Smo when we talked about what a Collider podcast, what we wanted out of a Collider podcast network. And it's kind of the opposite of what it is now. And again, we can argue whether this is the right or wrong way to do it. That's fine. But the podcast network is primarily and centrally copycatting the YouTube channel. It's just your flagship movie talk. And granted, this podcast, what we're doing is different. But I had always imagined not a new team necessarily, but like just brand new content, period. Like,
you talked about this. Yeah.
We did talk about this?
Yeah, we talked about it not that long ago.
Okay. Well, I think the only thing that was consistent with our vision is the factory,
right,
which is a good idea.
I shouldn't have to struggle to think about what's new about Collider. Video proper. Again, get the games, get this other stuff, but I shouldn't have to struggle to think about what's brand new.
Right. So it just, Afterthoughts is an exception, but it just doesn't feel like it's not as exciting as it could be, because like one-on-one is an example. of what
100%
what we're talking about.
Yes, my apologies.
One-on-one is
one-on-one.
One-on-one is the one thing that we look to. It's like, that's brand new, and that's its own individual show. They happen to do it on YouTube, yes, but that's brand new. Like,
it feels different, it sounds different, it looks different.
And I again,
I'm different.
I'm still not exactly sure why they don't. I don't know what the deal is with Podcast One. I mean, the deal in place. Excuse me,
right.
Not like I'm throwing them under
What's
the bus.
the deal with?
No.
What's the deal?
The deal
with
in place
Podcast
when it comes to just starting your own separate podcast feed. Like, when I think of the Collider podcast feed, I want to imagine 6 completely different logos that aren't on the YouTube channel, and like Collider Games being its own podcast, Riley Roundtable. I don't know what it is that prevents those shows from becoming their own thing, because then we could celebrate a different branch of Collider. Then we could celebrate something new and something else. But it feels like all of that stuff gets buried under the Movie Talk logo,
right.
under the Jedi Council logo, and that's just not how. Again, it's not how I imagined it. You can debate whether that's right or wrong, but it does make it all less exciting. And I wish that they had mastered the podcast network as its own something else rather than a copy and paste job.
And to be fair, I don't want this conversation to be misconstrued. This could be, I think, and it probably is. It's very isolated to us having this conversation, because I think we both agree, and I can't speak for you, but I'm definitely like this, and I've talked about this before. I yearn for new and exciting things and announcements, and typically on this show, when those things come up, we usually celebrate them, right? We break them down, we celebrate them, talk about the potential of them. We can sort of hype them up and really get behind them. But the landscape right now, it just feels kind of familiar. And partially too, to be fair, I'm like, some of the new ventures that they're going, the roads they're going down, wrestling and games, I've been supportive of games. Like, you can win me over with games. But they don't
have one. Joey Wrestle.
I know they have for you, for sure.
Joey, you still owe me $400 for the PS4 that you forced me to buy.
But for games and wrestling, it's not really particularly something I'm totally interested in. Obviously, going to follow these routes and see where they go. But yeah, man, I don't know. I would really, really like some. I'd really like some freshness, some newness.
But we've been there before. Me personally, it was Collider Nightmares. It was Collider Nightmares where it was the first time where I was like, this is not my thing, but if I'm in Schmoville or on Twitter or reading the comments or whatever, I learn that there is a passionate fan base that's all about this. So
a niche fan base.
Again, we will still give Wrestling Sheet, we will give Games all the credit in the world for scratching that itch for those people. And so it doesn't even matter if you and I are well educated in the WWE not to talk about the Wrestling Sheet. I do want to take this opportunity to break a scoop, Jay.
Let's do it. Let's break it.
This is a Collider Afterthoughts exclusive until they write about it on the .com. I've never broken a scoop before in this manner. Like,
need some help?
I had a source. No, I don't need any help.
Okay.
I had a source.
I'm going to go pee.
Okay, you do that. Guys, I think you're going to get very excited about this. What if you pee longer than the length of the scoop? Anyway, go ahead.
It's a field time.
Speaking of Collider Nightmares, I think this will excite a lot of the horror/nightmares community. The way I understand it, I've been told that a brand new podcast is coming to the Collider Factory very, very soon. And it's called Collider The Witching Hour. It is called The Witching Hour, and it is a brand new horror-based podcast hosted by Perry Nemiroff and Haley Fouch from the .com. And it's going to be happening very, very soon. I think that it's tremendous news for everybody who has missed Collider Nightmares. Personally, I'm friends with people in the group that have missed Nightmares terribly. And even though this isn't called Collider Nightmares, even though it's not going to be on YouTube yet, again, this is just the seed of something. It's going to be on the Collider Factory. I still think it's a step in the right direction, and I think it's going to excite a lot of the horror fans, the people that miss out on Nightmares. And again, don't forget, if the show does well and we take care of that show, not only can it have its own podcast feed, which it should anyway, it just should. That way they can, promote it as what it is. It might also eventually become a YouTube series. You never know. This is also it feels good to know that, because you and I have had a lot of discussion about TV Talk and how that could come back, and I don't think fans really trust fully. I don't think a lot of fans trust fully that anything can actually come back, that anything can actually be created and then stand on its own and then become YouTube. I don't know if that trajectory has been seen yet, because One-on-One was just like an automatic, this is on the podcast, right. This is on the YouTube channel. We haven't seen a show with that trajectory yet, so I think this might help fans feel better that not only can this be brought back to life, but maybe some version of TV Talk could come back to life, et cetera, et cetera. So we just kind of had like a meh kind of conversation about all that stuff, but I think this kind of ends it on a good note.
Well, I think there's a few things about this that not only makes sense, but makes me excited. One, totally makes sense because taking the temperature of horror today in the modern movie landscape, I mean, it's going crazy. We had Get Out nominated for Oscars. We had It being the commercial success that it was. I mean, A Quiet Place, Hereditary, so much buzz about the heat
Halloween
meter. Absolutely. The heat meter on horror is maybe as big as it's ever been from this sort of new modern movie landscape perspective. So I think it definitely has a place. It's smart for them to bring it back now. What I'm interested in from the content's perspective, again, this is another thing that doesn't necessarily resonate with me, but I am so on board. I'm such a champion of it. I'm excited for this to have been a YouTube show, to have gone away, and to be revived as a podcast, because it's something that we have always been about.
True.
For shows that have gone away. And it's something that's interesting because I'm a firm believer, and I think you are too, that YouTube videos and podcasts have very distinctly different voices. And for the fact that this show is going to be revitalized and rebuilt with the voice of a podcast is very interesting to me. So if it does take off, I want Perry Nemiroff, who's not on a lot of podcasts. I want Perry Nemiroff to fall in love with the voice of a podcast and take that on air. Like, that's exciting to me.
It's a very good point.
Pretty smart.
Again, The Witching Hour will debut very soon on Collider Factory. So
it better always just be an hour, because if it goes over or under, shame on you.
Isn't The Witching Hour more than an hour, though? Isn't it like midnight to 3 a.m. or something like that?
Wasn't The Witching Hour that episode of Atlanta where they went to like Little Germany or something like that?
I have no idea.
And Donald Glover or Zazie Beetz was getting chased around by that alligator dog thing?
I'm not sure.
It was hilarious.
I don't know.
What a great show.
It's true.
You ever seen it, Christian? No.
I almost sent a screenshot of Gambino's latest singles to Christian just as a dick move, but I didn't do it.
What if he said, I'm good, I already saw Solo?
Yeah, what if he was down on Gambino? That's funny. All right, so let's go back to this Collider Live Crusade, because this is something that I mentioned a couple of weeks ago. I've been waiting for this feature of Collider panel. Frank sort of enlightened us and said it wasn't really a town hall. It was more about like cryptocurrency and that sort of direction. And we're not going to really be privy to that information, it looks like, and until they decide to release it on the .com or some video for it.
Yeah, I don't know. Are we going to talk about, we had a conversation off air talking about news and the business side of news, and I'll bring that up in a minute.
I was gonna
Go
say,
ahead.
I don't even know what you're talking about. But
Go ahead.
I'd love to talk about it. But anyway, we're not privy to that conversation, and Collider Live was not mentioned at all. And again, I thought it was one thing, and it ended up being another thing. So I'm not even necessarily going to be harsh about that. But now that I know that that's behind us, and we can get down to business with Collider Live, and we sort of already talked about it, like, I don't know if I'm going to put this to rest. Unless they put a muzzle on me and just tell me to quit talking about it, which has never happened in the history of After Schmo and Afterthoughts. They've never muzzled me and said, you have to stop talking about this because we're just not going to take care of it. What we've learned this past week is that Christian does not have any interest in doing this. So, okay. Let's take him out of the equation.
So real quick, let me just say this. A couple things. One, going back to a conversation we had a couple weeks ago about the voice of people. Is it a big voice? Is it not a big voice? This is an example of, yeah, it's a pretty big voice. There's a whole YouTube or a whole Facebook group of people that has, like 14,000 people in it that want this. That's all they fucking talk about is the live show coming back. And our comment section last week on our YouTube version of the podcast was just littered with people, not last week, but a couple weeks ago, littered with people talking about it, what it could be. And it's something that people want.
And don't forget the over 300,000 subscribers that subscribe to the Smozo channel,
of course,
that aren't in that group. Not saying that all 300,000 watched every single Smozo, but the 14,000 in that group, it might be a fraction of the percentage of people that would actually tune into this, let alone the additional 200-something thousand that are subscribed to Collider.
That's a great point. So there's 20, what was it, like close to around 20,000 that tune in for Harloff and Ellis, which I would assume are using that show as their diet Schmoes No Live show.
But a lot of people probably don't want anything to do with it because it does not suffice as a replacement.
My point is there's those people. There's the people that were watching the live show. And then you have to think about the 500,000 people almost 500,000 people that are subscribed to Collider, and how many of those people might not have any fucking idea what the live show even is and might think this is great. Because there is not a lot. I mean, the only thing close to the live show, there's some things on Screen Junkies that have that sort of fun aspect about it. There, you have Red Letter Media that has that sort of goofy aspect about it. But Collider Video does not have that. In fact, the only thing that's close to it on Collider Video some of their other shows like have elements of what the live show could be. But the Schmodown is all out fun for the most part, and guess what? It's your biggest show,
and it's a lot of work.
That's true. That's true, but the live show doesn't have to be a lot of work.
That's exactly my point.
The Christian did put a thing out when we talked about this. He said, "Well," and I've heard him say this before, and it's a fair point. Well, if a lot of people want this, they need to prove it to us first. Sort of get that, but you can just try it, because if you don't, you'll never know how big it could be because it's on a completely different channel. To go back to your point.
But hasn't it already been proven? Like, it's the one thing that's consistently been proven.
Let me say this.
People want this back.
If you did Collider Live right now, one, it would be bigger. The first episode would be bigger than almost any Schmoes No Live show that's ever existed. And it may even well surpass that, because
given that they promote it properly.
No, I promise you they could drop it as a surprise, and that may even be better. Because
that's true.
Because there are, if you look at the trend, anytime the Schmoes No show took a break, or even when Christian came back, there was rumor that he could come back on a particular show because they hadn't been together. Mainly when they take breaks, those episodes get great views and people buzz about them for an entire week. And it's just like all people are talking about, man. Like, and I'm telling you, you put that out there and you title it the right way, you have the right conversations, the right people on there, it may be the biggest Collider thing, the thing that Collider's done in the year. Save for like some viral things that have gone.
But it doesn't even have to do that though.
It doesn't.
Like it could possibly get there, but it's like I think you're reaching higher than it actually has to. Like I think the proof is still in the pudding, given the fact that people want it, and the fact that the second it comes out the gate, it'll probably blow movie talk out of the water.
Right.
Especially, it's like if we're just looking at view count.
No offense to movie talk.
It would not at all. But well, if anything, I'm giving more. I'm empowering the schmoes. You know what I mean? But when you look at view count, it'll justify it tenfold. When you look at everything else they're doing aside from Collider Live, for one, and going back to something I mentioned last week, I don't buy that the toxicity in the fandom and the comments should have to worry about it. Again, going back to your original point, if they can just ignore it.
Of course, yeah.
But two, can't you say that about anything that they're doing now?
Right, and
I don't get that. But if Christian wants to, I'm not even
as if venturing into wrestling isn't going to bring on additional toxicity,
right? Exactly,
which it already has. But
right, so okay, take Christian out of the equation.
Agreed.
We will
100%.
We will never talk about. Well, I think that
guess what?
Live,
LeBron James left the Cavaliers. They're still going to be a team.
I'm going to move forward under the assumption, we will talk about Collider Live. I will move forward under the assumption that it can still work without Christian Harloff having a primary role. However, I don't buy at all that if that show comes back and it's successful and everybody else is having fun, that he wouldn't come on once a month.
Of course.
Or something like that.
Oh, that's a thing.
And that's the point, is that we could talk about we could have a discussion every single week and come up with a different way that they could do Collider Live to pull it off.
Right.
And again, there are so many factors. How many times do they do it a month? What day of the week do they do it on? All of that stuff could factor into whether they say yes or no over this. Who's going to be on it? Who's going to be the primary host? How much work do they put into it moving forward? Because again, we don't want to recreate the Schmodown in the sense that it takes a lot of fucking effort to do this thing, right?
Oh, for sure.
It could just be the thing that everybody looks forward to at the end of their Thursday evening or whatever. And they sit down. It could be an hour. Is it going to be 2 hours? Could it be a half hour? There's just so many factors that the blanket no that I have, it's just not acceptable,
right,
to me. Until there's a town hall, until there's some kind of dialogue and some kind of conversation that we have. But even then, you're still not going to get us to shut up about it. And when I say us, I mean the fans. They still want it.
Agreed.
They are still there, and you are still ignoring them. No matter...
Which is okay, but... But for something that's so positive, listen, when I say ignore the fans, I mean like bring TV talk back.
I was going to say, it's a different circumstance.
It is.
It's a different way to listen to the fans versus not.
Especially if it could potentially solve a lot of problems. It offers a space for advertising. It's a fun, lighthearted show that doesn't even have to be about movies. Like if you're sick of movies, do a show that allows you to talk about whatever you want.
Wasn't the proof in the pudding last week on our episode of Afterthoughts?
Yeah.
He said it was the best version of the live show. People were already ready to replace Christian and Mark with us.
Right.
What the hell kind of universe is that? That's how badly they want the show to come back, is they were done with Christian and Mark. It's like...
Rewind our episode and we're like, well, if you want the live show, you just listen to Sight and Sound.
You, at the top of this very episode, you talked about morale.
I don't like California. Okay, sorry.
You talked about morale, and we talked about it last week, the comment section. Feeling better about this space, because people seem to kind of feel lost right now in this space. There are people like Copster who came in like really, really big fans of something, and now they don't feel like they're as big of fans of something.
Yeah.
It's like, it just...
And to be fair, like most jobs will do that, right? Like a lot of people say don't meet your heroes, but you could also turn it and say don't, like, working for your passion. If your passion is to make movies or make music, let's say make music. If your passion is to make music, going and working at a venue as like some whatever and still having bosses, it could make you hate your job. Like, that's not what I'm saying. And I'm not saying Copster hates his job, but yeah, I mean, if you have a problem with, well, I don't know. I'm going down a weird road because I was about to say, if you have a problem with how something is, or you think morale or something needs to change in order for you to have higher morale, then actively change it, but also don't. That's one thing I want to be more clear on. I want to be more clear from them there at Collider what the process is of getting something new off the ground. And we got a little window of it last week, like pitch it to Fernandez if he thinks it has legs. Like, is that it? Is that all it takes? Because I know there's scheduling and all that other stuff. Studio time, who's going to produce things like that. Like, what is holding Collider Live back? That's what I want to know from you, employees at Collider.
I'm thinking about the reaction to this because I plan on thinking of ways. Again, if we need to prove it to them that this matters, I'm trying to think of how we can do that. Whether it be like even something as simple and silly as a Facebook group poll that we start or whatever. Maybe I need to.
Didn't he do that? Didn't Christian do that?
Well, I'm going to do it again.
Okay.
And
who's this guy? You should probably have Rosica do it.
No, I'm going to. I will get the admins to help me out with this.
Rosica, set up a poll.
I'll need them to.
Is he your Guillermo?
I'll need them to like the post. That way, it's optimizing the group because Facebook kind of buries stuff.
What the hell's the matter with you? I just made a Levitard reference, and you didn't even.
Yeah, it doesn't really apply here. But
oh, he's a Fighter and the Kid fan now.
We gotta figure out how to do this, but I'm thinking about like the repercussions because. Like, I know Christian is listening to this, and he's already done with the live show. Christian, pretend we're not involving you, because I don't want him to get mad that we're doing this, and I don't want him.
Well, it's my show.
Because, like, it gets to a point where if Christian wants to take his hat out of the ring, that's fine. But it would be wrong, and I would have a problem if Christian was like actively trying to make it not happen. Does that make sense? There's a difference in him like removing himself from the equation, but if there's any element of like him like playing a part of it, making sure that it doesn't happen, that then we would be like, what the hell is that?
So it'd be different if like Makuga one day like decided to in his the Josh Makuga Show studio be like, hey, welcome to the Schmoes No Show. It's like, what? No, you can't do that. But it's
can he?
No, he can't because he's not. I mean, Mark and Christian own Schmoes No, right?
I know.
But at Collider, there's nothing stopping somebody. There's no IP on doing a live broadcast style show that's fun,
right?
You know, like there's no IP there,
right?
Yeah, I don't know what's stopping him. I don't. And if it's like time, if it's because it's at night, I mean,
again, it doesn't have to be a Christian conversation.
Well,
I mean,
okay, so here's where I will give benefit of the doubt to.
He created the Schmoes No Show.
Hang on a second. One thing that I will give benefit of the doubt to. So one of my biggest, which I've always known this, but one of my biggest takeaways from working or not working at Collider, from definitely don't work there. Definitely haven't gotten paid. But at Collider Studios, walking in there, it clicked with me. This is just a place where people work. Okay?
Ugh.
So for me,
do I actually want to work there?
Well, I think it's to each their own. For me, I'm a person that wants to build my own personal brand. I see Collider as a place that has a bunch of people that can help me do that. I am helping them by giving them content, and if I don't want to live in California, but if I were to work there, I would say it would be a great thing for me to want to create new shows to help my personal brand, right? I mean, that makes sense. We've talked about this before. But if it's just a job and that's not what your goal is, then unless you're getting paid hourly, I guess, which I don't know, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I would assume they are. I don't know what California labor laws are, but they should be getting paid hourly. I don't know what incentive there is to stay later to do a show.
Right.
Especially if it's a flat rate and you're Ellis just getting paid whatever. Well, I don't know. I don't know. What am I talking about? Do they just want to go home at the end of the day? And it's hard for me to say, suck it up and do it. Why?
Well, then make it, again, going back to an either-or argument.
Make it during the day, I guess? Live show during the day?
It's like this show can just be used as a jumping-off platform, right? Like, you and I here, we're not going to figure it all out because we're flying blind here. But the show can be a jumping-off point to get any number of people to figure it out. So that's right. Where the figure it out mentality comes in. It's like we're laying the groundwork, but ultimately you're the one that can figure this out because I think that it can be done.
Yeah.
They told us it was going to get done.
They did. It was one of the first things that was pitched. Hashtag transparency. It was, yeah.
And we know that Fernandez is a big fan of that show as well.
Absolutely. It came from his mouth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where is it?
So, and I'm not at all trying to sound like, and I don't even know if I came off this way, but I want to make sure that, like, I'm here because of the Schmoes Know show. Like, this started out as a Schmoes Know after show. I mean, yes, in my heart, I have a special place for the Christian and Mark-led Schmoes Know show.
It's the most entertaining thing I've ever seen from Collider or Schmoes Know. Yes. 100%.
So I'm not saying the Christian, obviously. This goes
Take your movie
saying.
news that I can get any fucking where else and shove it. I don't care. I don't care. It's
right.
Not special. Nothing about what they have existing right now is particularly special other than the people that are actually on the screen. And the thing that celebrates the people on the screen more than anything else is that show.
Right. I wish Collider News was like, I wish Collider News was either its own YouTube channel or they just did the exclusives. Because isn't that the whole point?
Wait, say that one more time.
The exclusive scoops.
I got emotional for a second.
The scoops that Snyder gets, the ones that are particular to Collider. Isn't that what's valuable?
Yes, I mean,
and there's even a different thumbnail for it. It'll say Collider exclusive versus Collider News.
Yeah, we got sort of. I don't remember exactly where this came from. Now that I think it might have been like in a random appearance from Fernandez on another podcast, which I love. I love him just popping in on podcasts. Like Definitely. One of my favorite things. Because I'm like, I don't care if he wants to pop in on the wrestling podcast, and I'm probably not ever going to listen to. I'll listen to it because he's going to drop some news.
Right.
The thing that sort of came out about how there's this new currency for Collider, this new sort of economic principle, if you will, of Collider to sort of sell news to the rest of the internet. And we talked about this when we talked about the wrestling stuff, but if they can get people to aggregate their news stories that they're breaking on other websites,
right,
it is good business for them, and it is good business.
Yeah.
Excuse me, good business. It makes a lot of sense. However, I don't like that sort of comes at the cost of the user experience. I don't like feeling that the feed that I subscribe to for Movie Talk, Heroes, Jedi Council, Schmodown, which maybe I'm just there for one of those particular things, to just be a dumping ground for something that they're just going to sell back to other people. Like, again, it kind of goes back to this whole thing of it needs its own podcast feed. You can still accomplish those things. Collider's still going to grow with the absence of those news videos, and you're still going to get what you want out of the news thing being in fact, it might even grow at a faster pace than.
And that's the other thing too, because we talked about sort of like effort, like that's an effortless thing to do, is create a new YouTube channel, because
we still don't have a Collider podcast YouTube channel,
right? And
that's something that just shouldn't be a thing.
We're just talking about We're just talking about a YouTube channel that houses things you're doing anyway.
Right.
That's what makes it effortless, right? Yeah. I mean, that's the stuff that I wish was just sorted out before the Wrestling Sheet news. Ultimately, maybe it doesn't matter at all.
Right.
But it's just, I don't know.
You seem exhausted. You want to? I don't have a rundown, but I'm going to rapid fire something real quick.
I don't have anything else on the rundown.
Let's talk about some one-on-one stuff real quick. Joe Manganiello.
Manganiello, yeah.
Joe Manganiello going to be an upcoming guest on One-on-One. Very, very excited to listen to this episode because I don't know if you know this about me or not, but I'm not.
You're a big Magic Mike fan?
Was he in that movie?
Sure.
Donald Glover was. I do know that.
That's correct.
No, but I've been getting into Deathstroke a lot lately. And
I've been into Deathstroke for several years, and you've always been flippant about it. Never understood
Deathstroke was the background wallpaper of Jay Washington's phone. Anyways.
God damn!
So
listen to Sight and Sound After Party for that context.
I'll totally tell that at the very end of this episode.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay,
let's do
it. Stay tuned at the end for a post-credit scene. So I'm excited about this because I actually went on a random rabbit hole for him. I enjoyed True Blood. I thought it was cool.
Okay.
I'm just excited about this because from what I remember, and we're talking about this with you off air, I thought that he had a rapport with the schmoes in general, and I know that he's like a big nerd, which I think is great. I love that he's this beautiful man. He's a big guy. Very muscular, very fit, but he also loves like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff and just nerd culture. And I just think he's just a match made in heaven for Collider, and I'm excited for Christian to sort of break down everything that he's involved with.
Definitely. He was on Movie Talk.
Right.
And I
didn't get a chance to see it.
I was accidentally watching Movie Talk that day because I've been primarily listening to it as a podcast, but I happened to be at my desk watching it on YouTube, and I didn't even realize he was going to pop on. I didn't read the title. It was in the title. Very surprised to see him come on. And I listened to him a couple months back on ID10T and with Chris Hardwick, and got a lot out of him there when it comes to like understanding that he's a massive nerd.
Yeah.
They talked a lot about Dungeons and Dragons, so I did get a lot of that already, but I'm saying that in a good way. Like, you're right, it's a match made in heaven. He's extremely cool. He's like way cooler than I ever thought he was. You know, when you talk about, I mean, I have my perception of True Blood, and I have my perception of Magic Mike, but it's like there's a whole lot more to him than just that kind of stuff. So that's one of the benefits of getting to talk to people like this, is you learn more about them, and that's great for one-on-one as well.
Is Magic Mike a good movie?
I've heard that they're actually good movies.
Oh, you haven't seen it?
No, I have not seen them.
Hashtag movie.
I've heard that they're not exactly what you expect. Like, they're about like drugs and things like that.
That's cool. I'm into drugs.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, it was a great time. He got it. Like, he was
Movie Talk, you mean?
Yeah, he knew where he was. It wasn't like a stoic statue of a presence where they were just answering the cliche stuff. Like,
did he speak in an educated manner about a lot of the stuff they talked about?
Yes.
Awesome.
Well, he wasn't really there for that, for the rundown portion of Movie Talk. He had his own segment over here, but they still asked him a lot of questions, and he was involved. He had a great back and forth between all three of them, Perry, Snyder, and Ellis. They reenacted.
Not that Snyder's been in interview scenarios before, but how did Snyder interact with that conversation?
All great.
Awesome.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
Like, I just really admired that discussion. It was great. And a lot of people were excited. I was following the chat and the comments. We can't wait to have him back. Hopefully he comes back.
On Afterthoughts.
Right. Let's get him on Afterthoughts.
Big fan.
He could do it.
Well, yeah, of course he could.
I can't wait for his one-on-one. His Movie Talk appearance was great. Also, the Rawson Marshall Thurber interview dropped on the Collider Factory. We got word of that like a week ago or 2 weeks ago, whenever he was in studio. That podcast went up this week because Skyscraper comes out. So there's that.
Also, Comic-Con next week, which is cool. Have no idea what Collider's to what extent they're covering it. I'm sure they're going to cover it in some fashion.
Starts a week from today.
I guess there's really no. I mean, I'm not saying there's no reason for them to be there, but there's not a whole lot that they can't accomplish there's not a whole lot for them to accomplish that they couldn't accomplish in the same way that you and I would cover Comic-Con, right? I mean, if they break a news story in studio, it's still going to be beneficial for them, obviously. Random question, just thinking about this. Are there people like on call? Do they break news stories on the weekend?
Yeah.
Do they have people like on call to run to the studio really quick to break those news stories?
Oh, you mean the video channel? I thought you meant .com.
No, video channel.
No. I mean, they will for Comic-Con.
Right, of course.
But not any other week.
Of course. I've never thought about that. Never really realized that. Got to give a big shout out to John Schnepp.
Yeah.
Who's been in the hospital for, I guess he's just sick.
He is in the hospital. Yeah.
He is in the hospital. Not going to be making Comic-Con, which is a bummer. What else are we missing?
I think that about does it. I mean, get well, Schnepp.
Yeah, for sure. Where's Comic Book Shopping?
Joey, he streamed Fortnite to YouTube. I thought that was interesting.
I guess the day this comes out, you will get a Collider Games podcast with Ken Knapsack, which
that's true.
Is a lot of fun, I'm sure, because Ken is great, and he has absolutely gorgeous eyes in person. Ken? Absolutely. He looked fantastic.
He looked good?
Yeah. He was on an episode of Harloff and Ellis.
Yeah.
I'm excited to listen to that episode of Games because I feel like Ken being on that podcast is inviting to people who just might not be gamers. I know he's on Twitch. I know he plays a lot of Battlefront.
Fortnite.
Yeah, but as someone who primarily plays one video game to another, like, that interests me. I'm excited to see his interaction with Joey Rizal. It'll be cool to see the first time they've ever met each other.
All right, what's this story? I love it so much.
So your post-credit scene.
Oh my God, I love this story so much.
For those of you, I don't know how much I've touched on it here on Afterthoughts or After Schmo, but if you are a Sight and Sound frequenter or listener, you guys know that Ryan and I often talk about Ryan's anxiety. He is plagued with anxiety. And it's a serious issue, of course, for anybody that goes through it. But his anxiety is he's gone pissed now, but because he's anxious. His anxiety is pretty debilitating, and I've seen it firsthand. But on Sight and Sound, we talk about it in a pretty humorous manner, I would say, in a pretty, not necessarily joking because it is a serious thing, but, you know, we can laugh at it for the most part. But I've made really no qualms about my attitude towards it. I've never really made any issue about my attitude towards it, that we can still have fun talking about it.
Well, I'm comfortable with it.
Yeah, of course.
I have a level of
You're upfront and honest with it, talking about it as you should be.
Yeah, I'm very self-aware with it, and so that's why I don't.
And I feel like you've talked about it to Ellis before.
I've talked about it with Ellis several times.
Right, and it's just something. At this point, I feel like it's just a part of our personalities. It's part of our brand. It's just a thing.
Christian has experienced it firsthand as well.
Yeah, for sure. So we were talking at dinner at Wood Ranch. He had made a comment, just like a random comment, like, "Oh, really wish Snelling could have made it." And I made the joke. I was like, "Oh, not me. I hate traveling with him." And he looked at me and he laughed. And I was like, "Yeah, traveling with Snelling is just the worst." And he was like, "Oh, really? Why?" And I was like, "Well, I mean, his anxiety." And he laughed again. And I said, I finally caught that he just wasn't on board with where I was going. I was like, I mean, his anxiety is like real. It's like it's debilitating. Like it's a huge thing. And I think he said something like, "Well, how bad is it?" Like,
well, at this point,
no.
At this point, you said that you realized that everyone was...
Yeah, okay. He said, "Well, what is he anxious about?" And at that point, and I said, "What is he anxious about?" I said, "He's anxious about life." And all of a sudden, I heard, "God damn, life!" And I looked next to me, and it was Jay Washington, and I realized that it was silent at the table, and everyone was listening to this conversation. This was the type of scenario that most people were having cross-table chatter in their own little pockets. So I thought it was just like me and a few other people. So here's everybody sitting there thinking that I'm just some heartless bastard talking about my friend's anxiety, his debilitating anxiety. And so,
God damn.
So I just continue like, yeah, it sucks and it's a pain in the ass to travel with. Like, so if you didn't know,
you told him that you left me in Nashville at somebody's house because I got sick when we went to Nashville.
Yeah, we went on a trip to Nashville, and I ended up spending like most of a day by myself because I left you at, to me at least, it was a rando's house, and it was so bad that when I came back to the place, I sat outside in the car for like an hour.
Yeah,
by myself,
and I didn't even know you were there.
Yeah,
God, I love that story. God damn.
Yeah, it was afterwards because Kayla's so sweet and just, I don't know, worried about what other, not worried about what other people think. She was just like worried about our perception of being jerks. She was like, well, you kind of just were threw Snelling under the bus. I was like, no, I didn't. Like,
yeah, that's fine.
I
think it's funny.
This is how we are.
I mean, I laughed just as hard the first time you told that on Sight and Sound. So
right. Yeah, so that's Afterthoughts this week.
Yeah, guys, Jay and I are primarily the hosts of Sight and Sound, and we put those links in the description of this podcast. The sequel. Of this very podcast, you can find everything else that Jay and I are doing, including a podcast feed, including a YouTube channel. It's all right there for you, as long as they properly included the hyperlinks in the podcast descriptions. So definitely check out everything Sight and Sound is about, including our t-shirt store. Jay.
SightSoundPod.com. That's where you can find those t-shirts. Find me, Twitter and Instagram, at Jaye Williams, J, the A, the Y, the E. It's the same for both. Lots of stuff coming up on Sight and Sound. Got album reviews. In fact, this is coming out on a Friday, and it will be New Music Friday, and you can catch me every single Friday now because I'm back from my hiatus, covering all the new releases on Sight and Sound Music every single Friday night with my buddy Brando. We have a lot of fun. We make fun of the fact that each other likes dumb music. And yeah, you can be up to speed on that.
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at WhatUpSnell, and I'm streaming on Twitch. Come hang. Peace out, guys. We'll see you on the next one.
Later.